My name is Jan Reif, and I'm in the departments of History, Statistics, and Digital Humanities. And in my spare time, I'm chair of the UCLA Academic Senate. And it's my privilege today to get to introduce the speaker. For my introductions, I would like to begin with a quote, which Candace will recognize because I pulled it off the webpage. Improvement in post-secondary education will require converting teaching from a solo sport to a commonly based research activity.
Community-based.
I typed it wrong, sorry.
That's okay.
Good that she's here to correct me. Teaching from a solo sport to a community-based research activity. On one of her web pages at Stanford, they had the opportunity to put their favorite quote in, and that was the quote. And it was a quote from Professor Herb Simon, but it seems to me that it captures much of what you're going to be talking about today and what you've managed to accomplish in all your various tasks. It also is something that I think is really important for those of us at UCLA to be considering as we talk about these issues. Candace Thille was identified earlier this year as one of the Chronicle of Higher Education's 12 top tech innovators, and which I think is wonderful. And she's had a fascinating, if a varied path to becoming, and listen to the contradiction here, an assistant professor of education at Stanford and a senior research fellow at the Office of the Vice President for Online Learning. I think that captures as well one of those other kind of tensions of how we think of online and skills and so on in an academic environment. That path included a BA in sociology. It went through a corporate and consulting career that led her to think about education and technology, to Carnegie Mellon, where she spearheaded the Open Learning Initiative, which became one of the most kind of famous learning online and capturing that information to learn about learning initiatives that we've seen, to a master's degree, a PhD, and then her new role as an assistant professor and a senior advisor. She's going to talk with us today, and this is at least your third presentation at UCLA, right?
I think so, yeah.
I heard you in January when you were here for the 20 Million Minds, and then you came and talked to the college deans about the Online Learning Initiative. And she's going to be talking about surfing the tsunami, technology, and the pedagogical innovation. Before I turn this over to her, however, I do want to thank all of the people who helped make the Marshak Colloquium possible. It's co-sponsored by the Department of Education, the Department of Public Policy, this one as well as Marvin L. Smotrick. Did I pronounce that right? Mm-hmm. Sorry if I didn't. It's also, the colloquium as a whole, the largest all-campus ongoing colloquium, is sponsored by the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost, the University Librarian, the David Geffen School of Medicine, the Dean of Social Sciences, the Dean of Humanities, the Luskin Center for Innovation, and the Departments of Economics and Political Science. So thank you to all those people for making today's wonderful presentation possible. And Candace, I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful.
So what I was going to talk about is surfing the tsunami, and where that idea came from was from a quote from I just joined Stanford September 1st. Prior to that, I was at Carnegie Mellon. I want to talk about work at both places. But I thought it's good to start with a quote from my new president, John Hennessy, who last year said, "There's a tsunami coming. I can't tell you how it's going to break, but my goal is to surf it, not just stand there." And what he was referring to was something that you probably have all heard about. How many people have heard of MOOCs, or massively open online courses? So the idea behind a MOOC, and I actually took these slides from, I guess he's my colleague, Andrew Ng, who is a faculty member at Stanford, out of his presentation when he's talking about MOOCs. And what he says is when he did his first MOOC, usually the class he teaches at Stanford, he takes about 100 students, a semester, and he has one faculty member. So to teach that class to 400 students would take 4 faculty members. And in his first play of his MOOC, he had 120,000 students enrolled. And so quickly, he could serve 100,000 students with one faculty member. And for him, and for a lot of people that are advocating MOOCs, this is the big power. This is the tsunami that we can essentially serve hundreds of thousands of students with one faculty member. Now, I can see a couple people in the audience going like this, because you're worried, is this what she's going to talk about, how great MOOCs are? And actually, I'm not, because I actually think this is flawed. This is a flawed way of thinking about it, and it's because what it's really about is not massive instruction or massive lecturing. It's about student learning. And I picked a couple quotes from Herb Simon, who was quoted at the beginning, but another thing that he said was that learning results from what the learner does and thinks, and only from what the learner does and thinks. And the only way we can, as teachers, influence learning is by what we do to influence students to do something to learn. And then also from Grant Wiggins, who's the president of the Center for Learning and Assessment, he said it's not teaching that causes learning, it's attempts by the learner to perform that cause learning, and dependent on the quality of the feedback and the opportunities to use it. So everyone's talking about the being able to increase productivity by recording lectures and distributing them in great quantities. And the piece that they're missing is that what we do as teachers and what happens in learning is not the dissemination of projected information. It is the opportunities for students to engage, conditioned by their opportunity to practice, get feedback, and use that feedback to re-engage. So I'm going to talk now about a different approach that we were taking at Carnegie Mellon, where I was the director of the Open Learning Initiative for the last 11 years. But the Open Learning, how many people have heard of the Open Learning Initiative? Okay, so the idea behind it was we were creating these open online learning environments that were based on the idea of integrating the technology, the science of learning, and teaching. And our goal was to create environments that both supported the improvement of teaching and learning, but also were research labs so that we could better understand how learning happened, specifically in that discipline, but now also more generally. So I'm going to give you kind of a couple of examples out of some of the things that we were developing that sort of exemplify this kind of approach. So one of the things we know from years of studying learning is that goal-directed practice with targeted feedback can accelerate and support learning. So if you know that that's how students learn, then how do you design a learning environment that essentially relies on that principle to design it? So one instantiation of that are these things that we have been doing a lot of at Carnegie Mellon, which are these sort of artificial tutoring environments, where you have the piece of software acting like a good human tutor. So I pulled an example out of our engineering statics course. So how many engineers in the room? Okay, so you'll know how to do this. Probably everybody else in the room is looking at this feeling a little anxiety. So we basically give the student 3 forces and ask them a simple question. What's the direction and the magnitude of the sun? So he would just type it in. Somebody else might try and type it in, and they kind of say, no, that's not quite right. And the student's stuck. I'm not sure what to do. They can ask for a hint. The system says, well, at this point, when they get this activity, they're at a point in their learning where we're actually kind of expecting that they'd be able to do this. This is what we call a did I get this? This is the opportunity while the student's engaged in learning to kind of assess for themselves, can I do what I'm supposed to be able to do? So the system reminds them the purpose of this activity is for you to be able to assess yourself. So really don't just ask for hints and get help. See if you can do it, but if you really need some help, we'll give you help. And so the student can click there if they need the help, and the tutor expands. And says, remember, the first step is to resolve each of these forces into its components. Can you do that? Just go ahead and type in for the first force. The student, again, can just type it in, get immediate feedback. If they're not sure what to do, they can ask for a hint again. And now the student says, now remember, so then the system essentially goes into instruction mode. And so it starts to help the student think about what they need to be thinking about when they're trying to solve this problem. So give them this first level of hint. Okay, now I get what it is I'm supposed to do, I can do it. If not, they can ask for the next hint. And it starts to walk them through how to do that. Until they get to the third level hint, which we call, in a jargony way, the bottom out hint. What you'd probably call the answer. And they can just go ahead and type in 7.49. And then they can go on to the next force, and so on. And at each of those sub-steps, if they're stuck, they can keep asking for hints, and they get context-specific hints to that sub-step. So now, when they finish that, they've resolved all the forces into components. It's like, great, now can you finish the problem? If they can just go ahead and type that in. If not, they can just keep asking for supports and feedback. So I kind of fast-forwarded here. So the student has been able to finally answer the original question, but they needed to essentially take all the scaffolding that was available. So the system says, great that you were able to get there. If you want to try again, click here, and the system will generate another activity, and all the hints and feedback will be specific to the sub-steps that they're working on. What this basically provides students is 24/7 support outside of class in building fluency in that particular procedure of summing vectors. And that, as I said, is based on work that was done at Carnegie Mellon for decades in this area of cognitive tutors, which are just basically a piece of software that's supposed to act like a good human tutor. It answers, it just observes the student's interaction. When a student needs help, they ask for help and they get help. When they need feedback, they give them feedback. Otherwise, it just hangs back.
Yeah, when you make the software, do you just imitate teacher? I mean, you have teachers who tell you what to put in the software?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When you make the software, how do you do that? How do you construct one of these tutors? Well, like that one, that summing force vectors tutors, what that was, we took a couple of mechanical engineers, faculty that teach statics, put them with learning researchers who were trying to unpack what is the cognitive process we want students to be able to go through when they are trying to understand concurrent forces. And what kind of activity would we give them to be able to both support them to engage in that cognitive process, but also would allow us to observe where they struggle. So, and the degree to which the amount of apparatus you bring to designing the tutor has a lot to do with what the domain faculty think is important and also what seems to be challenging for the students. We also can do approaches which are called cognitive task analysis, where you have an expert engage in the task that you want the student to develop the expertise in, and as they're engaging in that task, you just have them keep talking out loud, so that they're making explicit the implicit thought process in which they're engaging while they're doing sort of a data analysis problem or whatever it is. And then you do the same kind of think alouds with novices, and then you take the transcripts, and then you can match where are the gaps, and that's where you target the instruction. So those are some of the approaches you can use. Okay, and so, yeah, so speaking of statistics, so everyone's saying great, I see how that would work really well for doing things like building fluency with procedures. But I mean, how many folks here do actually teach at the college level? Okay, so I want to look at this transcript. This is a transcript that we did from a student that had passed the traditional statistics course, intro stat course, at Carnegie Mellon. We brought them in to do these task analyses. And we only looked at students who had gotten at least a B+. I believe this particular student had gotten an A- in the intro stat course. We brought them into the lab and said, here's a data set you haven't seen before. Here are some questions. Here's the statistics software package you learned to use. Do the analysis. And then recorded the transcripts of the student thinking out loud as they were trying to do this. Now my ex-provost now, I can say, at Carnegie Mellon used to hate it when I showed this slide. It's like, this is a student that got a really good grade in intro stat and 3 months later could not, given a data set and a novel question, actually solve the problem. Now the same student, if you said, here's a data, do a t-test. Boom. They could do that. But what they couldn't do was the tools that they had learned, that they had built fluency in doing, they didn't know how to synthesize those and apply them to a novel situation. So I think most people, if you're honest, a lot of your freshman students, this is the kind of result you're going to get because they're memorizing this bag of tricks.
Yes.
It's like, I'm getting this bag of tricks, and in the midterm, they're going to ask me how to do this bag of tricks. I spit those back out. Then I memorize my next bag of tricks, and they don't have a coherent conceptual structure of how all of these different skills and concepts fit together and be able to flexibly apply them in a novel context. So when we designed our statistics course, we actually focused on trying to help students construct that coherent structure. And so we do, and not just build little tutors to help them build procedural fluency, but also think about how do we help students construct a conceptual framework. Yeah?
Do you score them based upon whether they use the hints to a great degree or lesser degree or no hints at all?
So his question was, do we score them based on whether they use the hints to a degree or a lesser degree or no hints at all? So not in a grading sense, but we do use that information to be able to predict for the faculty member what the knowledge state is of their students. And I'll show you how we do that. But yeah. And then I'll give a couple more examples. Go ahead.
I just have to bring this up.
Okay.
This reminds me of one of my math professors when I was an undergraduate. And he'd stand up there and he'd lean over the lectern and he'd say, "You guys just want me to give you a big meat grinder so you can put the data in and the answers come up. I want you to learn how to do it."
Exactly, and that's what most of us want. The thing is that just in some way yelling at the kids and saying, "I don't want you to do this, I want you to just learn it." We have to make that process actually explicit enough that we can support the students so that they do engage in what we think of as learning. And I'll tell you, as I work with multiple faculty in multiple disciplines, sometimes the hardest thing, getting to your point about how do you construct tutors, is getting experts to be able to articulate what it is they mean when they say, "I want the students to understand this." Because part of what we've learned is, and this is particularly true of university professors, because our expertise is so deep and has gotten so dense, that to try and unpack that and even imagine how a novice is thinking about that domain is a really difficult thing to do. That's why a lot of our processes are what I call unpacking expertise processes. To try and all that stuff that you just know intuitively now, figure out what's conceptual framework that we can make that explicit to support students to develop that expertise. So yeah, right on target there.
Well, meat grinders, computers.
Pardon?
Meat grinders, computers. It's a poison we have to watch out for.
If used improperly, absolutely. So let's talk about how to use the technology to support the kind of learning we want students to engage in and not things that we don't want them to do. So I'll give you another example. In our, because you can have meat grinders that don't have anything to do with computers, such as, how many chemistry faculty do we have in the room? Okay, so one of the things we observed when we were looking at designing the chemistry course is we started looking at the way textbook problems are for chemistry. So this is kind of a typical textbook problem. I'll let you read it. And what we would observe the intro chemistry students at Carnegie Mellon solving these problems, and how did they solve them? They did a really good sort of ends means analysis, where they would look at this question, they would flip through the textbook to the chapter that we were kind of working on, find a problem example that mapped in wording to the problem that they were given, plug in the values from the problem we gave them into the equation that they found in the textbook that they mapped, they were great at math, solve the map, get the answer, get an A, have absolutely no idea how that mathematical equation connected to the chemistry, or how the chemistry connected to the real world problems. So we did two things. One of them was created this virtual lab that had these virtual lab problems that essentially broke that process from being successful. So instead of giving them this kind of a problem, you could give them a problem that was construct an experiment to measure the heat of the reaction between A and B. And they would have to, using the virtual lab, essentially do the virtual lab experiment, and from that construct the equation, and from that solve the mathematical problem. That was the first thing. And then the second thing we did was situate the learning of chemistry into, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, back on that. I mean, that can't be graded by a computer. How are you grading or figuring out that virtual lab problem that they're actually getting it or doing it?
Okay, so because, I'll get to this point, because everything that we do is in a web-based environment. So every move a student makes, we can observe. And I'll get to how we use that. So yeah. The second thing we did was, so the two goals when we did the chemistry course was to essentially promote the flexibility by moving from the mathematical procedures to the chemical phenomena using the virtual lab, and then from chemistry to the real world by using a scenario-based learning approach. And so so when they learn stoichiometry, we don't just say, here's stoichiometry, let's learn it. They get the stoichiometry unit opens with a small documentary about a real world problem, which is the arsenic contamination of the water supply in Bangladesh. And they get, just real short, why is this a problem? Then they get put in the role of chemist. And in the virtual lab, they're given a well water sample, a virtual well water sample from some hypothetical well in Bangladesh, and they're asked, is this water safe to drink? And we tell them the World Health Organization tells them that 10 micrograms per liter of arsenic is safe in drinking water. But when they do the analysis in the virtual lab, it doesn't tell them how many micrograms per liter of arsenic. It tells them how many moles of arsenic are in solution. And so even to answer that very first question, they have to be able to do that conversion. Again, they can, as they're trying to do that conversion, they get hints and feedback. If it's clear that they have no clue what they're doing, they're just kind of wildly typing things in, then they get put into a just-in-time learning experience that actually walks them through the instruction of how to do that analysis. Once they do that, then they continue on, and they learn that there's a Bangladeshi chemist who has created filters out of local clays. And so they get, again, a sample of the clay and look at what's the absorptive capacity of that clay and how often would a family of 4 have to change the filter to keep their water safe to drink. So through each step, they're using the tools of stoichiometry, but they're using them in application to solve a real-world problem. And I won't go into more that kind of detail on all of our things, but just suffice it to say that one of our goals is not just to support students to build this procedural fluency, but to think about how do we construct activities that allow them to apply those skills and concepts that they're building the fluency in authentic tasks. So some of the examples are like in our economics course, we have students first engage in essentially online trading experiments. It's kind of like an eBay kind of thing where they're trading cars. And they first act as economic agents, and then once the experiment is closed, usually runs for a couple days, once the experiment is closed, then all the data that's generated from their interactions gets transferred to their online workbook, where they learn about the theory of supply and demand by looking at the market statistics that they generated. So they go from being economic actors to essentially observers of the economic process. Then there's the engineering simulations, which we talked about, a little bit about biology simulations. Then the causality lab, that's a lab in which students essentially construct and solve problems at looking at causal relationships. The chemistry lab I already talked about, and then there's a proof lab where students learn how to do formal proofs. So these are just some examples of the kinds of activities that we construct that support students to build that kind of skill and concept. So now comes asking you guys a question. So everyone's all talking about online technology and how powerful it is. So I really want to hear what your thoughts are about what's the most powerful feature about these technologies. So I've got 3 pictures here, and I'm going to ask you to vote. Not yet, I'll explain what each of the 3 pictures are. So the first one is the simulation capacity. It's what I've been kind of talking about. That you can, in these computer environments, have students engage in tasks that are really hard to construct in the in-person environment. Like if you're an engineer, you can have students build a bridge and collapse it and nobody gets killed. If you're a biologist, you can have them look at the interactions at a molecular level. If, so there's all kinds of simulation capacities, very powerful. The other one, this middle one, is what most of the MOOCs are playing on, access and convenience. If you've got a computer screen and connection to the internet, you can pretty much learn anytime, any place. Very powerful thing. And the third one is getting increasing interest, which is the connective ability. That with an internet connection, you can connect your students to additional resources, to additional experts, to other learners. You can connect them to the world. So we've got these three big promises or powers of this technology. Sort of the simulation capability, the access and convenience capability, the connectivity. So let me ask, okay, so show of hands. How many people think this is really the big power? Okay. How about this one? Access, convenience. How many people think this is really big power? Okay. Connection. How many people think this is connectivity? So it's actually pretty even.
What about all of them?
Yeah, all of them.
That's me. I'm into all of them.
You want the all of them? Okay, all of them. How many are all of them?
Yeah.
Okay. How many are people that just don't raise your hands when you're asked? No. So is there something, anything missed? Yeah, go ahead.
How about writing answer, for them to learn how to write answers or questions using grammar that you can understand? Or to send, I had just recently had a student sending me asking about a grade, and apparently she was using her cousin's site, so she was sending me, the email was coming from April Wang, when it was really Shi Zhangzi who was asking. So it was asking me, and I kept looking up April Wang on my records.
Yeah, so
that's the thing. I mean, it's a question of also being able to, what I think of as write readable sentences.
Right,
they don't have to be long.
That's right. So that's another thing. So how could you think of using the technology to support students to write readable sentences?
Boy, we're just lost.
So we can talk about what's at the core of that and how we can support students to be able to do that effectively using the technology. But a point I want to make here is, because a lot of times, I should probably step back, because a lot of times people think when they hear me talk, so something that's going on in their head is, oh my gosh, she's trying to replace us with computers. So I'll tell you what I used to say to that when someone would actually get up the nerve and say that to me. You're trying to replace faculty with computers. I used to say, and I don't say this anymore, and you'll understand why. Frankly, any faculty member who can be replaced by a computer should be. And what I meant by that, which wasn't quite communicated in that statement, what I meant by that is what we as teachers and as faculty members do is so much more powerful and so much more rich than what anybody can do right now with a computer. That if all you think you're doing is what I can do with my computer, then yeah, you should be replaced, because it's undervaluing the real power and the real value of teachers and faculty. But since it didn't get heard that way, I stopped saying that. And instead what I say is, and this is also true, that the task that we are given as teachers to do today is undoable with the current tools and supports that we have. Not only are we being asked to teach more students, I don't know how many people have been teaching here for a long time, but have more students that you're being asked to teach. Not only more students, but a much greater diversity of students. And I don't mean racial, ethnic diversity. I mean diversity of background knowledge, preparation for being in your class, skills that they have to be able to do what you're asking them to do, and even goals, even why they think they're sitting in your class in the first place. There's a much greater diversity of students. And we're asked to teach more students with a greater diversity and still get them through to the end point, which also the information keeps changing. And the tools and techniques that we've been using are not up to the task. It's not fair. It's not fair to the students, and it's not fair to the faculty member. And what we're really trying to think of is not how do we replace faculty, but how do we build better tools that support that teaching and learning process? Which gets me to my answer to this question, which is, yeah, all three of those things are really important, but I don't actually think they're the most important, or actually the biggest power of these environments. What I think is the biggest power of these environments is what Google has already figured out. It's what Amazon has figured out, or Netflix. The big power in these environments is not using them as dissemination vehicles, but pushing out the learning to that lovely web interface where you can observe everything the student is doing. You push it out just far enough that you can observe the interactions that tell you what's going on in their learning process. Now, the difference between what Google and Amazon and Netflix are doing when they do that is they're trying to learn more about you as consumers, so they can better sell you something, or better learn about consumers as a group. The reason we're pushing it out to that interface is to learn more about learners, both that individual learner, so that we can give the faculty member better support about how to support that individual learner, but also better about learning in general, so we know more about how to design environments that better support learning. So that's why I call that the killer app. It's this idea that you push it out to the interface and then collect data on what the student is doing, so you can drive these 4 very powerful feedback loops. And when I say, and you know, the MOOCs all talk about they're collecting data, but the data that they're collecting is at a very different grain size. And when we design our environments, when I was showing you that engineering statics tutor, every move that student's making, whether they're asking for a hint, getting feedback, typing in an answer, that's semantically meaningful. We're not just collecting click strings. We have a underlying model that says when they ask for a hint there, that's because they're struggling with this concept. So then we can aggregate all of those actions across multiple opportunities and get real insight into that student's knowledge state. So we collect that data and give feedback to the learner, which I showed you. We also collect that data to give feedback to the other real key actor in the education system, which is the faculty member or the teacher. So what I did is I took a screen capture out of, this is what we call the instructor learning dashboard. And this is out of an actual course that's running, a statistics course, running actually just down the street from here at Santa Ana Community College. And this particular faculty member is, this is the module on examining distributions, and these are the learning objectives for this module. So I don't know if you can read them, but so what a faculty member would do typically is say to their students, if you're meeting Mondays and Wednesdays, here I am on Wednesday. My assignment to you, instead of going to read your textbook and do this homework problem, is work through Module 2 of the OLI course. And work through that module before 10 o'clock Sunday night. Because we're meeting at 10 o'clock Monday morning. And I need some time to sort of get a sense of how to spend our class time. So the students work through it, they're getting all the hints and feedback, and the system is aggregating the interactions of the students to make a prediction about where that class's knowledge state is to give to the faculty member. So I can see, if I just have a short amount of time, I can quickly look at what the students would be able to do and figure out where I want to, if I'm just lecturing, where I want to spend my time. So green, a little bit, tell you what those bars mean. That bar represents my class. So green means, though that sort of ratio of students, if they're green, that means the system's predicting they get it. If I were to give them an assessment in class today, at the beginning of class, the system's predicting that those students would do fine on an assessment that assessed that outcome. It would say these students here, there's about a third of them would do really well, about a third of them are kind of moderately, and about a third of them are really struggling. So that outcome is relate measures of center and spread, the shape of a distribution, and choose the appropriate measure in different contexts. So if I want to see a little bit more about that, I can click into that bar, and I can see first off, who are the students in each of those groups. So this is a real class, so I did remove the names for FERPA. But I would see the students' names, and I would also see how many activities they've engaged in that is driving that prediction. I could also look over to this side and say this larger outcome has some sub-skills and concepts associated with it. So maybe the reason they're struggling is because they're having a hard time with compute the median. So I might want to focus my attention on computing the median. So there's a lot more on the dashboard. You can also look by individual student, all of that information as well. But again, this brings back to, so that's the student, the instructor. The other two bars I'm going to talk about kind of at the same time. One of them is the course design team, and the other one is the learning researchers. So another difference between the kinds of environments that we're constructing and some of the way the traditional online courses are constructed is we don't go to an individual faculty member and say, let's put your course online and record your lecture and put you online. Instead, we bring together teams of, say, in this case would have been multiple statistics faculty, and bring them together from multiple institutions to co-create an environment that they're all going to use and other people can use. So the individual student gets the feedback from their work. The teacher, the faculty member teaching the course, gets the feedback, the data for just their class. The course design team, and this is usually what a course design team has on it, multiple domain experts, instructional technology people, learning science researchers, user experience folks, software developers, universal design for learners, and then a project manager. They get the data from all of the courses that are running that semester for that subject area. So like last semester, there were about 60 institutions that were using the intro stat course, and so they were getting the data to look at what's working, what's not working across all those courses. And then the last group, I'll just mention briefly, are the learning researchers. So the sister project to the OLI project that I ran at Carnegie Mellon was the Pittsburgh Science and Learning Center, which was an NSF-funded learning research center. And the whole purpose of the Pittsburgh Science and Learning Center was to essentially develop and refine theories of human learning. And they used the OLI environments as the research lab. So we had this beautiful synergistic relationship where we had all these learning researchers whose research we could use to inform the design of the environment, and then they could run experiments in the environment that then they could use to refine their learning theory. And they had, the other beautiful thing about this collaboration is they got $50 million from NSF, so they could use a lot of that funding to develop really good data analysis tools to really look at the data that's being thrown off and help us make sense of it. And this is kind of one example of the way that one of their data analysis tools, this is called a learning curve analysis. So this gets to, I think, your question about do we track hints and feedback usage. So the number of times that a student asks for a hint or makes a move that they get feedback on, that goes into what we calculate as either their error rate or their assistance score. So the y-axis on this graph is essentially their assistance score, the number of hints and feedback that student had to get when they were attempting to do something that demonstrated that knowledge component. So if we were talking about compute the median, one of the great things about these environments is if you were going to teach students to compute the median, the traditional way we do that is we say, okay, now I'm going to teach you to compute the median. Here's how you do it. Now here are 10 arrays of numbers. I'm going to give you 10 problems. Compute the median for each of those. And then if you can do that 7 out of 10 times, then we say, okay, you're pretty much got it. You can compute the median. But then you have that problem, like the transcript that I showed you, which is at some point in a few months, they confront a problem where actually computing the median is just what they need to be able to do. And no one said to them, oh, now you're computing the median, so they didn't know to do that. So when we want students to be able to compute the median, what we really want them to be able to do is recognize in what context is computing the median something that would help them make progress, be able to actually compute the median, and then be able to use the answer they get from computing the median to continue to make traction on the task they're engaged in. Those are all, we would call those all separate knowledge components. And what's beautiful is we can give students in an online environment multiple tasks in which compute the median is a sub-step without having to call it out to them. But we know, and we tag it in the computer system to know that. So every time they come upon that, we're observing, can they compute the median? So the x-axis here is the number of opportunities, say if this were compute the median, that they had to demonstrate that they could compute the median. This graph is a learning curve, and this is the kind of curve we like to see, because this shows us that learning is happening. Because when they were first asked to, say, compute the median, they needed a lot of help and support. By the time they were computing the median down here, they didn't need any. We don't always see graphs like this. Sometimes we see graphs that start up there, and they just kind of hang out up there. What would that tell you? Yeah, they're working, they're doing stuff, but what they're doing is not supporting them to learn. Sometimes we see them down here. What would that tell you? Yeah, they already know. We're wasting their time. We're giving them lots of practice on something they don't need to practice. Sometimes, and this is the one I'm not expecting you to get, you see this nice sloping down, and then you hit an inflection point. And it flattens out, or it dips up. Anybody got any ideas? Pardon?
Plateauing?
Plateau. Yeah, often what it means is, I mean, it could be a couple things. It could be the student starts gaming the system because they already know it and they're just kind of like, don't want to do it. But sometimes it means we've misidentified the knowledge model. That what we think of was, that was just compute the median. But no, in fact, it was recognized when computing the median should be applied. So it was a new, what we would call knowledge component that was conflated in an activity that we had naively called just compute the median. So we use these graphs to kind of zero in on either adjusting the knowledge model or adjusting the learning design. Yeah.
What keeps your students going? I mean, what are the incentives for them to try to do it?
Okay, so
What are one of the main problems that we face?
yeah, so the question is, what keeps the students incented to do it? Now these environments that we were designing, they were originally designed just to be open, individual, support independent learners who weren't at an institution to learn statistics, because let's be honest, it's a human drive, right? I want to learn statistics. And that's why they funded us originally. But now these environments are most commonly used in hybrid mode in traditional instruction. So oftentimes faculty will assign using this module to their students. And in terms of still why do students do it, I mean, it does change the relationship between the faculty member and the student, because where we see it most successfully used is when faculty communicate that change to the student. Because this notion of that there are learning outcomes that I'm supposed to achieve as a student, and that I have the faculty member to support me, my peers to support me, and this computer system to support me, but it's my shared responsibility to engage and support myself to learn. That can be a real shift for a lot of students. And the way that that's communicated and that sort of made more explicit can really change the degree to which students really engage with the environment. Yeah.
What do students know about you gathering this data? Might a student be nervous, for instance, that if he keeps looking for hints that you, the teacher, will then think badly of him?
Okay, so that question was, what do students know about our collecting this data? Will he or she think that if they keep asking for hints, the teacher will think badly of them? So in our environment, so two things. One of them is this is a big research project. And so when a student creates an account, irrespective of where they're coming from, the first thing they get when they create an account is a consent form that explains that I'm doing all this research on them, and they can either agree or not agree to have their data collected. There's no difference in their learning experience. It's just whether the data collector for research purposes, for this kind of graph, is either on or off. For if they're a student in a course where the instructor is using this to support their teaching and learning, even if they agree not to have their data collected for research purposes, that doesn't change that the faculty member gets the data to support them in their teaching and learning.
But does the student know that?
But the students know that, and also it's pretty clearly indicated in the course which things are high stakes, meaning they count towards your grade, and which things are not, are low stakes, are supported practice. Yeah.
Do you have any adaptive learning things on these sort of things so that if students aren't just
practicing things they already know.
So the question was, do we have adaptive learning things in here so the students aren't just practicing things they already know? So I assume what you mean by that is, does the system automatically assess, because we're collecting all this data, what's that student's knowledge state, and so give them another problem or not give them another problem, or choose the problem to give them? No, we don't do that. And part of that is actually, it's a philosophical thing, partly. And part of it is that we're thinking about, part of what we're trying to develop for students is both help them learn statistics, but also help them to be better learners, have better metacognitive skills. So instead what we do is we give students these activities like that "Did I get this?" activity that I showed you, the engineering statics tutor, where they're given the task and we explicitly say this is a "Did I get this?" activity. And at the end, they're asked, "Did you get it yet?" And if you didn't get it yet, then you have some choices. You can, and even if you did get it, you have choices. You could move on, or you could, do some more practice. And we're trying to give the students feedback and help support them to build better learning skills too, instead of just adaptively giving them to them. Yeah.
So I envision that what you talked about so far is all within course, so this learning curve is within a course. When they go to take an upper division statistics class, they still need to know how to calculate the median. Do you collect the data in the upper division class to see how far the whip up happens and how quickly they're able to relearn it once they're refamiliarized with the process? Okay. Is that the next curricular kind of assessment step that you?
Yeah, so we haven't done that yet, partly because we would need to have, what we would need to do is have the follow-on course also be in this environment, so we weren't like testing and we were just seeing how they perform. But we have done a couple things that kind of get to that. One of them is this compute the median. We'll keep that as the example. When you're computing the median, you actually learn how to compute the median when you're in module 1 or 2, and when you're still doing descriptive statistics. But then when you get into inference, you're given data analysis problems where at some point in doing that larger, more complex data analysis problem, you compute the median again. And so we can observe, 7 weeks later, whether you could just flexibly go, oh, I need to compute the median here, I'm going to do it and just move on, or whether I don't know what I'm doing here, hand feedback. And in fact, I've had faculty member call me and say the dashboard's broken. Dashboard's broken? And I said, yeah. Okay, so we were in, module 2, and I took a screen capture of the dashboard so I'd know which students are struggling with what, by looking at where they were red, green, etc. on these different outcomes and sub-skills. And here we are 7 weeks later, and the student is struggling with this particular concept. So I went back and just not looked at my screen capture, just went back in the system and looked at the dashboard, and it's completely different. And I know the students have been doing no more work in module 2 because we're past module 2. They're not doing any more work in that. So why does the dashboard look different? It looks different because what's driving that dashboard is not the activities that they were just doing in module 2. That's the system's prediction about the student's current, meaning right now, knowledge state. So if in the work that student had been doing in module 4, 6, 7, was changing the system's prediction about their ability to do a skill that was introduced in module 2, then we're going to say, no, that student's gone from orange to green, or whatever. So we do trace it within course, those kind of learning goals. And then when we were doing some studies, which I'll talk about, we did do retention studies where we brought students into our lab the following semester and gave them new problems to see how did they perform. Yeah.
Let's say I, as an independent individual, am all inspired and I'd like to go out and learn statistics or chemistry or whatever. Where do I go? How do I do
you
this?
Yeah, you can. So I'll give you the URL. These were all developed as open educational resources. So anybody can just log in, you can create an account or be completely anonymous. And you can just go in there and teach yourself statistics. So you do have that natural human drive. I knew it. I knew there were people like that. So basically what we're doing is, this is kind of like in a nutshell what the project's about, is apply learning science and research and the scientific method to the course design. Develop these interactive learning environments collaboratively, so not just go to a single faculty member and expect that person to be able to think about how do you design all this stuff, but bring together multiple faculty with learning researchers and all those people. And then these feedback loops to the different groups for continuous improvement. And then building communities, back to the original Herb Simon quote, these communities of evaluation and practice that continuously improve the environments. So that all sounds great on paper, Candace. What difference does it really make? So I just talked about a couple studies. One study, this is probably, I always talk about this study because even though we did it back in 2008, it's the one that people are most interested in. And this is that accelerated learning study, which we replicated 3 times. But this is the original paper on it. And this was a study we did conduct at Carnegie Mellon in the Intro Stat course, where we took students who were just registered as students in the Introductory Statistics course at Carnegie Mellon and did a study. I'll tell you that what I wanted to do was randomly assign them to condition off the roster. My IRB, for some reason, would not let me do that. But what they would let me do was essentially tell the students we were doing this study and have students volunteer to participate in the study, and from those who volunteered, randomly assign them to condition. So I actually had 2 different control conditions. I had the students who were registered, who never said they wanted to be in the study, and I had the students who said, yeah, I'll be in the study, who were then randomly assigned to the control condition, which was the way that they had registered to take the class anyway. I'll tell you that there was no significant difference on any measure between the 2 control conditions. We also did do a pre-test and post-test, and to also look at learning gain. And the students in the treatment condition, in the accelerated condition, essentially completed the introductory statistics course in 8 weeks with 2 class meetings a week. The traditional condition is 15 weeks with 4 class meetings a week. So we always talk about half the time, but it's actually a quarter of the instructor contact hours. And the difference is the students in the traditional condition went to class 4 times a week, had a textbook, 3 midterms, and a final. The students in the accelerated condition just worked an OLI, no textbook, and met with the instructor twice a week. They also did 3 midterms and a final. And on all measures, and they all did, both control conditions and the treatment condition all did pre-test and post-test using a test that we did not develop. That was a test that was a statistics education research project. So it was a well-validated instrument. And on all measures, the students in the accelerated condition did as well or better than the students in the traditional condition. And we did bring them back the following semester, which was fall. We did the study in the spring. And in the fall, we brought samples from both conditions back and gave them, again, the test, and also gave them new data analysis problems to solve. And there was no significant difference in retention. So the students that had higher gain actually retained that gain. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, maybe 3. So as I understand it, I mean, my dean has told me to teach online, and there were no support whatsoever. I was thrown in this. I took a package deal from Pearson, which is basically following what you have done. That's all right. You can say, well, I'm here to learn. So from your presentation, setting technology aside, I understand, so as faculty, we're asking the wrong questions. That's why we're impeding on students' learning, or we're not helping it out. Is that a true statement?
No, I wouldn't say, what do you mean we're asking the wrong questions?
We're not, I got my PhD and they tell me, go and teach this class. I had no teaching experience whatsoever. So I went there and I taught my heart out, all right? So I didn't have any really teaching skills per se, except for my own enthusiasm. So could it be that here there's a place that you're trying really to educate instructors as to how to do it, and you're remedying that problem with your technology steps?
Okay, so is everyone hearing her question? Okay, so I wouldn't say that I'm trying to remedy instructors. I'm trying to give instructors who, as you point out, all have varying degrees of interest, skill, ability, experience teaching, which is a learned skill, frankly. So why we expect, when our whole university system is built around the idea that you have to teach people to get them to get concepts and skills, that we take people and say you should be able to do this without any support to develop those kinds of, but anyway, that's a whole separate question. But so to give better support and skills to the instructors, they need better tools. And that's what we're trying to do, is create better tools.
Okay.
And some faculty say to me, what this feels like to me is just a really good TA. Because I can send the students off to work in this environment. The TA answers all those questions that I know they're going to ask, and answers them and is infinitely patient, answers all those questions, and not only that, but also tells me before class, listen, this is where they're struggling. This is where they're getting it. So it gives me real insight into how to use my time. I did have the faculty member that was the treatment faculty in this accelerated learning study. He taught intro stat at Carnegie Mellon for a long time and was a really high relationship faculty member. And he was kind of like, this isn't going to work because the way my students learn is really in relationship and in relationship with me. And if I'm only seeing them, a quarter of the time, we're not going to have that relationship and it's not going to work. And at the end, he said to me, this was the best experience I've had in my 15 years of teaching statistics. And I was like shocked. I said, why? He said, well, for the first time, the students came into class and they knew what they knew and what they didn't know. I knew what they knew and what they didn't know. But probably the most important thing, they knew that I knew what they knew and what they didn't know. So we spent that 50 minutes that we had really aligned on here's where we are and we're trying to get here together. And so we were able to use that class time with a very different sort of approach. So, yeah.
In this study, how large was the class and were TAs involved in the additional?
So how large was the class? Is that what you asked?
I mean, the lectures.
Yeah, so we did it 3 times with 3 different class sizes and instructors because we were looking at different effects. The first time we did it was a smaller class. There were about 70 students in the class versus 120 in the traditional lecture. But then we did it with 2 larger class sizes, so they were the same because we were worried about the class size being a mitigating factor too. And we also did it with different instructors.
And were TAs involved with the traditional?
There are TAs in the traditional class, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry about this. But what you're saying will support a hybrid course,
Yes.
not a totally online course.
That's right. Yeah, so there are people that use the OLI environments because they're openly and freely available as completely online courses. Some institutions choose to do that. They still have an instructor, but that's taught completely online. But where we see the most effectiveness is in these hybrid models. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about faculty labor hours? So let's say if I've been teaching statistics for 15 years, you could probably just parachute me into a classroom and I could do a good job.
Yes.
Whereas the process that you were describing of how faculty work together with the whole team, blah, 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 right? So it seems like maybe you spend 50,000 faculty hours to teach a course that ordinarily you'd have pumped 200 hours.
Okay, so people hear that question too? So it's about time. It's about faculty time. And you are actually putting together the amount of time that it takes this group of faculty to create this environment and also how much time it takes once the environment is created to actually teach it, especially if you're looking at the dashboards and changing what you're teaching based on what you're seeing. So I actually have 2 things to say. We separate out in terms of looking at the time resource, make a distinction between the time allocation for creating the environment, because that is a different role in some ways if you're a faculty member who's engaging as a course developer on that team. And then there's the amount of time that it takes for faculty who are using this environment to support their teaching and learning and maybe making, tweaks or whatever. And we've done some studies looking at that second piece. And in fact, I did a study pretty early on this causal and statistical reasoning course where I had 20 faculty at different institutions that I was following and having them, paid them to be in the study to log how much time they were spending preparing to teach this course. And it was not different than what they'd spent in their traditional course for most of the faculty. There was one faculty member who was a total outlier. 3-4 times the amount of prep time. And what's going on? So I called the guy and said, can you explain, I'm interested in what you're spending all your time on. And for him, he was like, I do not believe students can really learn without my lecture. And this is a new area for me. So what he was spending his time doing was going through the whole module in really good detail before the lecture and writing a lecture that would teach the students what was in the module. And he was doing, 2 lectures a week plus a lab where he was having students do case studies and stuff like that. At the end of the first lecture, 2 students came up and said, "Gee, professor, seems kind of like what you lectured on today was exactly what we were doing in the course. Is that going to be true every lecture?" And you say, "Well, yes, because I think it's important for me to reinforce and, da-da-da-da-da." And the students say, "Well, if I've done all the work before lecture, do I have to come to lecture?" And he said, "Well, no, but you need to make sure you really get it because in the lab we're going to be putting these ideas into practice." Fine. Students stopped coming.
Mm-hmm.
As the semester went on, what do you think happened? Yeah, students, by the end of the lecture semester, he had, fewer than half the students still coming to his lecture. They were all coming to the lab where this is a causal reasoning course, where they were doing causal analysis on different cases. They were bringing cases in and doing causal analysis. They were all coming to those, but they were not coming to his lecture. And, I had a conversation with him about this at the end of the semester because he could have had one of 2 responses to that experience. One of the responses would have been, "Not come do this course anymore because they don't come to lecture." And that was not his response, actually. His response was, "Well, I'll be." They get it. They can get it. They can get the stuff that I was doing, a lot of what I was doing in lecture by working in this environment. And where it was really kind of fun and engaging is when we were doing these labs. So what he did the following semester is he was lecturing 2 lectures a week in one lab. He took out both the lectures, and had one class be kind of a lab and review, and then one being lab. And actually went way back down on time that he was spending. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of on the same topic, I have a colleague who's gone to a flipped classroom kind of approach where the students outside of class are, watching his lectures or reading them somehow, and then class time is spent more doing problems and asking questions. Have you done any studies comparing, because this sort of seems like a flipped classroom, comparing that sort of lower tech version with this technology?
No, we haven't done that comparison yet, and that would be an interesting thing to do because it is kind of the same idea, except for that a big difference is, in some ways I don't quite get all the thing about the flipped class, I'll be honest with you, that kind of flipped classroom, because I guess I struggle a little bit with what's the difference between having them watch a lecture outside of class or read that lecture in a textbook outside of class. I'm not quite getting what the difference would be, because you don't get any more, they don't actually get to perform and practice anything, and you don't get any insight as the instructor about what do they know or not know from having engaged in that out-of-class experience. So I think the goal there, really the goal in the flipped classroom is just to get people to stop lecturing, to kind of have them spend the class time engaging with the faculty member in a way that's going to really leverage that faculty member's expertise. So, yeah.
2 questions. First, to what degree does this technology apply to, say, history or ethics or religious studies or whatever? And second question relates to the gentleman up in Silicon Valley that's made a name for himself.
Sebastian.
No, Khan.
Khan, yeah. Okay.
I'm interested in your comparison.
Pardon?
And I'm interested in your comparison with Khan's approach.
Okay. So yeah, and I actually met with Sal Khan a couple times. I actually met with him before he got funding from the Thille Foundation because they were like, "Oh, you need to talk to this person before we fund you." And I think what Sal's doing with the small, he's got 2 things going. He's got the small videos going that explain discrete concepts, and then he's also got exercises. And it's very much, because he's doing, I guess I would say lower, in terms of grade level, lower level education. He also it's a very strong mastery model. Often in his activities, he believes that you have to know how to do a fraction before you can do a percentage. And so you have to demonstrate that you can get 10 fraction problems right before you're allowed to progress onto a percentage. So I would say that there are a couple of differences. One of them is I don't actually believe knowledge is constructed in that, maybe some knowledge is, but a lot of knowledge is not constructed in that tightly discrete building block sort of way. especially when you get into more conceptual things. Sometimes students really don't get what a median is until they are attempting to use that tool of a median in some other application. And then suddenly it's like, oh, that's why it's different than the mean. And if I just were drilling them on get the median, I'm not going to let you go until you get the median, they would not have the opportunity to construct that richer understanding in this other context. I mean, it's a different way of thinking about concepts and skills, which is they're not little discrete things that you learn here and then transfer to a new context, but actually your understanding of something like what is a percentage is refined by each new context in which you're using it. So that is a different underlying philosophy in the way the learning environments are constructed. The other piece is that most of the things that a lot of people are constructing comes from their belief about, and Sally even said that this is how I learned it. So since this is how I learned it, it must be how people think, and so I'll just construct it that way. And that's and I said to him, you know, there's a rich literature about mathematics education and about how people learn mathematics. And so as you're constructing these underlying models of practice, why don't you build it on that existing literature as opposed to having to recreate it out of your own ear? So, but a lot of people seem to find a lot of value in the work he's doing, so I think that's great. I just think, and it's my same sort of in some ways complaint about MOOCs, is it's great that people are getting all this value out of it, but a lot more people could get a lot greater diversity of people could get a lot of value out of this if instead of just going, you'd taken a little bit of time to do what we always say, do your lit review. You know, before you start, one of my colleagues, Ken Katinger, who's a learning researcher, has a saying, which I love, which is, you know, Candace, 20 hours in the lab can save you an hour in the library. And I feel like that's what we're getting now. You know, we're a lot of the MOOC providers are rediscovering all this stuff that I could have given them an article that would have told them that, you know, they could have learned it in 15 minutes instead of, you know, 20,000 students and all this complex data mining. So, I don't know, that's probably a longer answer too. Yeah.
The first question was, can you apply this to religious studies or ethics?
So can you apply this to, so the question is, what's the this? So would I create a cognitive tutor for some complex concept in religious studies? Probably not. There are probably parts of what you want students to learn in a religious studies course around approaches to approaching a piece of literature that you might be able to create some kind of tutoring for. But the this that I'm really interested in isn't that particular type of technology. It is the idea of bringing together the disciplinary faculty who have expertise and care passionately about their discipline with the learning researchers who care passionately and study how people learn, with the software engineers who care passionately about creating cool technology, and bringing those together in teams to say, okay, what does it really mean to have a student have a learning experience in religious studies? And what kind of really interesting experience could we create using these environments that would both support them to have that experience and also help us observe what they're learning and what they're not learning, so that we can give them information and give us information so we can make different choices about how to use the class time. And that's really what's at the heart. Yeah.
I think it's a great idea, but there used to be movements in education, and I'm kind of retired out of there, where they were trying to develop teacher-proof curriculum. And for a while I was trying to develop counselor-proof modules, and to some degree with some success. Now, I think this goes a little further, but even one of my deceased colleagues, 10 or 15 years ago, James Bruner, he died about 10 years ago, he had some tests that persons would answer, are you certain, uncertain, or do you make a good guess? And in some ways I see some of this in your modules. So
what's the difference now? What gives this a better shot than we had 20 years ago?
Right, you have better technology, and I think that's great. And I want to ask, what did you test with the effects of the teacher giving because I think if you have different teachers in different locations, the effectiveness of the module, which I really applaud. I think those are great, sounds like great modules, and I hope you can continue to build them, but have you tested that?
Yes, yes, and we get big variability. And it's interesting because I just recently did a study in 24 community colleges with 4 different OLI courses, and we did have teachers, instructors that were control condition, were teaching their traditional course without OLI, and then instructors that had agreed to use OLI. And it's exactly what you point out, that it's really hard to make claims, even though we did pre-test and post-test and all that kind of stuff, because the variability within condition of the instructors using OLI was so, because we didn't do the thing where you have to do it this way, because we were trying to look at how does it work in a natural environment. So we let the faculty member all decide how they were going to use it, and there was so much variability in terms of how much they assigned or didn't assign. And actually that didn't even prove to be as significant. What proved to be more significant is the degree to which the faculty member used the instructor gradebook and feedback reports. That was the most predictive thing, which is kind of even more so than how much on the syllabus they, pardon?
It was the most predictive for...
learning gain. Well, it was sort of, I mean, I can show you the graph, but it was sort of that there were certain features of instructor use that predicted student use that then predicted learning outcome. And more than some of the demographic factors you might think would be predictive and so on. And we did, so yeah, I can talk for days about that, but that's a hugely important point. And the other thing is what we observe just in the natural state is faculty that use OLI the first time they use it the first time, and the second time they use it, very different experience. And that doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's a new skill. Think about what do I do when I see that dashboard? Yeah, in the back there.
All right, so bottom line for many of the pressures on us is to teach and have it cost less.
Yes.
This is not less expensive. How do you argue or make the case to administration to do this because the learning gains are better, but it'll cost you a lot more money?
Okay, so everyone hear her question? Okay, so there are a couple ways to think about this. One of them is how you're evaluating costs. So if the environment is created on grant funding, which these were, and you as a faculty member, all you really need to do is be part of this community to the extent where you're adapting or shifting or changing, but a lot of the core design is already either been done or continues to be done by you in smaller parts and a larger community of development, then that distributes the cost across multiple institutions and faculty. But then but in terms of the cost savings in the classroom, how much does the DFW rate cost? So if you're the drop, failure, withdrawal rate. So if you have, say, an introductory chemistry, I don't know what, it's probably not as compelling an argument at UCLA because you probably have better, well, actually, no. I just thought of this. My son is a junior at UCLA. And he sent me, he took a class, I'm not going to say what class it was. He's in the engineering field though. He took a class when he was sophomore or freshman, and he sent me an email, and the subject line of the email was simply, "This is what's wrong with higher education." And I opened the body of the email, and all that was in there was a histogram that showed the distribution of scores on this final, which I think is one of those Weeder classes, in his class. And he said, there was a note that said, "Note, Mom, there are fewer students who got over 60% on this final than there are students who got less than 9%. So here's a cost saving. So are you going to pass all those students? Or are you going to say, no, a lot of those students fail and have to take that again? And so what's the cost, both in terms of just cost to the students, to the university, of those students having to take it again? Or what's the cost if those students go on to the next class and you have to spend all this time teaching them the stuff that they didn't get in the class that was the prerequisite to your class? so I mean, I think that there are ways of looking at cost that maybe are more sophisticated than just how many students can we put online in a big class and teach them with one less teacher. But it's a more sophisticated conversation. Yeah.
How much does it actually cost?
Okay, so grant funding. The first few courses we created were about $500,000, but that's because we were also building the environment at the same time. But we also paid. I didn't believe that this work should be done on the backs of the faculty, so I got enough grant money to pay faculty release time so that they could really think and spend time designing these environments, the faculty at Carnegie Mellon and the faculty that we were engaging at other institutions. We also, I include in that cost also when faculty participate as use and evaluation faculty, we pay honorariums because it does take time to sort of think about how you're going to change your teaching practice and give feedback to the team about what's working and not working and all of that. So anyway, so they still cost a lot. It's because it just takes a lot of time. But the idea is if you can either get a foundation, which I have a lot of them, that to fund it, then the cost doesn't have to be borne by the institution or the faculty member. And then, or if the foundations stop being interested in funding this stuff, then if you have multiple institutions and departments sort of cooperating, then you can defray the cost over multiple budgets. Yeah.
I'm just curious how much you do updating of these. So when I teach a course, first year it's never as well thought out, the second year it gets changed and so on. How much do you do that in the process of all these different teachers?
Yeah, so the idea was for that to be a core part of the process because we're collecting all this data, and as I said, the course design team gets that data, so we pretty much know where we need to focus in on and do refinements from a very data-driven way. But then it's a matter of the foundations want to support. It's not as sexy. I want another $1 million because I want to improve this course. That's not as cool. So that's been a problem, and that's part of trying to look at sustainability models that not only sustain just the serving up of the courses, but also the ability to do the data analysis and do the ongoing improvement. And that's why I do think ultimately it's going to be more consortial kind of models so that you have some investment in doing that.
Yes, in a research university, the content changes. It's not just a matter of improving the the content changes, and then on top of that, research faculty disagree about stuff. So it's not like we all agree what the median is, but we might not. Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So two things. One of them is that faculty don't agree. That's part of the fun. Because it's really cool. You know, I don't know how many people have tried to get faculty together to agree on a learning outcome or something like that. And it used to be that's how I'd start every design process. Let's first agree on all the learning outcomes and then we'll start the design. I learned. So you have to agree on enough of the learning outcomes to be able to have something you're targeting for the design. But where you actually build that agreement is in the design process. Because you can talk abstractly about what it means, but then when you actually start to have to say, here's an activity, and when you observe students engaged in that activity, it makes it a much more functional conversation. And that's the other thing that I was talking about what I'm going to do at Stanford. So what I'm doing at Stanford is OLI 2.0, which is, this is material to your question. So in OLI, as I said, these were all built as open educational resources. So they're openly licensed, Creative Commons license, so anyone can use them, and that's all great. The platform that we built, though, was not open. So the courses for all, and now Carnegie Mellon has actually created a company, which I'm taking no financial benefit on, created a company that is licensed to the platform and the courses and is essentially software as a service licensing them out to institutions to use. So the challenge is that the courses were legally open, but not practically so, because the only place these courses run is in the OLI platform. So what I'm doing, one of the things I'm doing at Stanford is Stanford made an agreement with edX. You know what edX is? edX is a not-for-profit MOOC provider that was created by a collaboration between Harvard and MIT. And so Stanford made an agreement with edX not to join the edX consortium. So there's not Stanford X, but to be a software development partner. So Stanford engineers and edX engineers are both working on the edX platform under the agreement that everything they do is open source. So that, and I brought some of my engineers, and they're working on building into the Open edX platform the functionality of the OLI platform, so that I can pull the OLI courses over onto the Open edX platform, so they'll be truly, not just legally, but also practically open. And then people have a choice. If you want, it's because some faculty and institutions are going to want a vendor, commercial provider that, and all the benefits that you get from that, they can do that, or they can be part of the ongoing open source community. So, yeah.
So could you speak a little more to the question of how this, we've looked at how these courses are more expensive to produce, but they are, in a sense, there's an economy of scale.
Yes.
And part of the issue, of course, for universities weren't built intrinsically, right, to take advantage of that. And in the way you're talking, right, you get external granting agencies, you do consortia. Now you've moved from one place to another. Instead of doing the private route, you're now doing the open. Right? There's a number of possibilities here. Could you say a little bit more about how you think about this and what the solutions are? What could UCLA do, for instance? What could UC System do? How large do these consortia need to be to really get scale?
Yeah.
How do you get one platform that can be used for multiple disciplines? How do you get faculty together to actually agree on using a single platform? These kinds of questions.
Yes, those are all great questions, and those are all areas of research, frankly. I don't have I know exactly how to do this. I can tell you for a long time, I could talk about things that we've done that I think worked in the past and things that we've done that was like, okay, I'm not doing that again. But part of it is that's part of the learning of building it into an open source platform now. I also think that the other thing that I'm doing differently at Stanford is when you may have noticed from the courses we were building at Carnegie Mellon is there, in terms of the learning theory that was driving the design, very cognitive, because that's where the depth of expertise is at Carnegie Mellon, very powerful. But as anybody who teaches knows, there's a lot more involved in the learning experience than just understanding the cognitive factors for the learner. So one of the other things I'm excited about at Stanford is we've got all these researchers that are looking at other aspects of the learning experience, like the student's mindset, Carol Dweck's work, stereotype threat, Claude Steele's work, and all these different other theories that can inform how we think about the design of the environment. And also, how do we use these environments to extend and expand that research? Because I think one of the cool things about being in a research university is that we don't have to separate out the teaching and the research as discreetly as we have. That this is a viable research area to really understand how do we use the teaching environments to further our research. So this is kind of the new model, is using these different theoretical models to design the environment with the domain experts, and then using the data that's thrown off through these different data modeling processes to refine both the environment and the explanatory and predictive models of student learning. And you only get this kind of power at scale, because if you've got 27 students using it, so that's why you need multiple institutions in varying Carnegie classifications too. I think that's the other thing that's going to need to change a bit in the way we've done higher education is, for the most part, when we've created consortia, we try and create consortia of institutions that are just like ours. So like, yes, Stanford and UCLA can engage in a consortium, but we're not going to invite Santa Ana Community College in, because that's not one of our kind of people. And I think that, but if we're trying to really understand human learning, we need to understand human learning across multiple contexts with multiple learners. Yeah, in the back there.
When we talked about MOOCs originally, there were these massive numbers signing up and massive numbers dropping out.
Yes.
And you talked about the financial costs of FDW, but what about retention in classes? Does the rate of withdrawals and whatever go down?
Yeah, so the thing about, maybe it was a little confusing since I started off talking about MOOCs. What I'm talking about here are not MOOCs. These are not, they could be, actually we have had an OLI environment used to support a MOOC. It was neither a Carnegie Mellon nor a Stanford MOOC. But and it did actually increase the retention. So what we're looking at is really supporting hybrid modes of more traditional education. But yeah, we have done some studies and we're able to show increased retention, lower DFW in classes where students were using these environments.
The examples you showed at the beginning with virtual tutor were all sort of one-on-one interaction for the student with a learning module. I'm wondering to what extent does your system either support or interact with learning communities?
Yeah, that's great. So did you hear his question? So that was the other thing that was true about OLI at Carnegie Mellon. It was very much focused on the individual interaction with the computer. And one of the other broader research areas is looking at group knowledge construction and group dynamics, which the edX environment already has more of that sort of stuff built into it. I was also doing some work with Marlene Scardamelia and Carl Bereiter up at the University of Toronto, and their research is all about group knowledge construction. And the tools that they construct look at not individual expertise, but group expertise and distribution of expertise. And we were working for a while combining the two environments to see if we could get increases on both. So yeah, that's definitely an area. Yeah.
Yes. So I wonder about questions that are open-ended. Let's say you say design an experiment that shows blah blah blah, and it's something where a human being would have to look at this and say this is a good experiment or a bad experiment. Where some of the MOOCs have been experimenting with peer grading, right? So could you comment on that?
Sure. I mean, I think peer grading is a whole interesting area of research. And it's funny to me that the MOOCs call them peer grading because I don't know then how you define a peer. Is that just anybody who happens to sign up for a course? But so I think that peer grading works differently depending on the pureness of the environment. But that's a whole separate discussion. So you could look at peer grading, and there are some students, some doctoral students that I have at Stanford that are looking at improving the peer grading algorithms in MOOCs and doing some interesting stuff with data mining on that. So yeah, you can pursue that. There are people who've done research in peer grading from an educational psychology perspective, like Chris Shun at the University of Pittsburgh, who've developed tools that really support peer grading or peer feedback. So that is an area of research that you can look at how to do it effectively and not so effectively. But there's also, going back to your first point, that doesn't mean that's the only way to deal with an open-ended environment. Like the virtual chemistry lab, we can give students what looks like what is an open-ended, ambiguously structured problem, but we can watch still what they do. And what they do, we don't have to stand over them and watch their process in real time. We can look at the data trail to see how are they engaging in that open process. That's what I mean about semantically tagging moves. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's kind of interesting because when you do these, like the open-ended text box thing that I was showing, even with that statics tutor, that was a free type. We didn't say, pick one of these four, and which one's the direction or mag. We had them free type it in. And part of the reason for doing that is underneath that text box, we know what the problem is that we gave them, and we also know from experience what the common kinds of things that students might type in there that reflect common things that we know they're not getting. And it's effective to let them go ahead and type those things in and then have essentially the answer processor track for those particular kinds of responses the student could get and then give them context-specific feedback on what they typed in. People tracking what I mean? It's sort of like a multiple choice test, except for you're not presenting the options to the student. You're letting the student generate the option, but you know from the design that there's maybe 20 things that they might type in, and each of those 20 things tell us something about what that student either gets or doesn't get. And so we can look for those 20 different things, either parameterize them or actually track for the strings, and gives feedback on what they type. And what ends up happening with that, when you can do that, is the student will say, how did the computer know what I was thinking? Because they type in 5.6, and you say, oh, you probably put in 5.6 because you did this part, and then you went here, and that's how you got that. Think about it this way. It's like, wait, yeah, that is what I did. How did you know I did that? Well, I know you did that because that's what you would have done to get that answer. But then the other thing that happens is you have students type in something that you didn't predict. And then you can look at it and go, and then if you see like 20% of the students typed that thing in, then you go back to the domain expert and say, what's going on? Why would they have done that? And then try and unpack what it is that would, yeah. And then the next time around, this is the data-driven improvement, you trap for that answer and give them feedback on that. So there's ways of using the data to be able to look at what's going on and be able to improve the environment that way. Yeah.
There's a dinky little question. On a couple of your slides, this has got nothing to do with content, you had an illustration that was a cellular automaton.
Uh-huh.
Where is that?
Oh, yeah.
Where'd that come from?
That's from our Introduction to Computer Science Principles.
Okay, thanks.
There's a module on cellular automata. It's actually fun because we have them build, we give them different rules and have them...
I teach that, so maybe I want to steal from you.
Please do. It's okay. You're supposed to steal. So I didn't get through everything, but I do want to say that my last thing, which is this, and this gets to this Baumol, who talked about productivity in higher education. And back in 1967, he said, without a complete revolution in our approach to teaching, we cannot go beyond current levels of productivity. My message to you is this revolution is possible, and my question is, who is going to lead it? And I have an advocacy. I think not-for-profit higher education needs to get together and lead this revolution, as opposed to the external, either commercial providers or others, sort of jumping in and leading this revolution. So.